Y'all can't help but spread false information, bro. He is not sending legal immigrants to a camp. Read! Why don't you guys read?
I find it incredibly interesting that someone accusing me of not reading past the headline apparently doesn't watch past the first 5 seconds of a video. I addressed this in my video. I don't know why you're claiming otherwise.
Surely they're not gonna stick just any migrants in there, only the worst criminals.
You're also gonna ignore the context I provide on the implications of the Laken-Riley Act and the background on Gitmo. You also, by the way, suggested I said things that I didn't. Like the irony of accusing me of spreading misinformation when you're doing exactly that about me. So what, you can just sick your fans on me? But okay, I'll bite. I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt and assume that you genuinely just got too upset to listen past the first 5 seconds. By the way, you seem most upset by the idea that I somehow suggested that this applies to your family, which I didn't. But even if it doesn't apply to your family or families like yours, I still am not okay with this project for many reasons. Okay, number 1, the claim is it's only for the worst of the worst criminals. Source, Trump. That's what we have normal prisons for. That's what we have normal prisons for. You get convicted of a crime, you get sent to prison. We got a lot of them. We're kind of famous for it. I'm just not sure why Trump would need to put them in a special facility away from the eyes of journalists and human rights organizations, in the jurisdictional limbo that I mentioned in the previous video you didn't apparently fully watch. I also don't know why you're suggesting that other countries don't lock up people convicted of crimes. Or are you suggesting that we start locking people up who are not convicted of any crimes? Let's talk about who Trump calls worst of the worst, because he has painted immigrants with very broad brushes. Or do you not remember the bad hombres moment? By the way, here's the first headline, which I share because it's easiest to read on screen, and that way people can go find the source themselves. The article includes one of the more famous quotes. Quote, "They're not sending their best. They're bringing D, they're bringing crime, there are." And some, I assume, are good people. Some to me sounds like he thinks it's a minority of them, but granted that is up to interpretation. He's made many such statements over the years, and here's the article so you can find it. I suggest you do read it because it includes some quotes from his that I can't share here without censoring every other word. But it talks about the escalation in his rhetoric against migrants, including the suggestion that they're poisoning the of our country. You might remember a very meme-worthy, but again, completely baseless accusation he levied against immigrants who are here completely legally, despite his claims to the contrary. A baseless claim that he did, in fact, repeat. Here it is in full. But here's where it gets real dark. Because not only is he making baseless accusations of criminality, now he's also blaming it on genes. Again, full quote that I can't really repeat here, and I believe this. It's in their genes. We got a lot of bad genes in our country right now. Now, I'll admit that this is technically speculative, but what do you think someone who believes that violence comes from genetic predisposition does to keep a country safe from the worst of the worst? And even if we were to set that aside for a moment, he has still made repeated comments suggesting that he believes that the majority of migrants and immigrants, even ones here legally, are somehow violent criminals. And again, he just signed the Laken-Riley Act, which allows him to lock migrants up without proving that. But this brings me back to Gitmo's history, okay? Gitmo has always held just the worst of the worst, the T word, which I don't think I can say on this app, who, as I mentioned in my previous video, were imprisoned for years, sometimes decades, and tortured. Around 780 total of the worst of the worst. Do you know how many have been convicted of a crime? 2. The vast majority were never even charged. Here's the source on that, by the way. As of a year ago, 15 remain. 9 have been charged with crimes. 9 total. Of those, 2 were convicted. Yeah. But hey, Gitmo was just for the worst of the worst. That's why everyone was okay with it. That's why law-abiding Muslim men didn't have to worry. It's just for the worst of the worst. I didn't bring up immigrant citizens or anything like that. You did. By the way, I am also an immigrant and a citizen, but you should know that Trump has repeatedly talked about denaturalizing U.S. citizens. Not just for the old reasons, right? That resulted in fewer than a dozen people per year. In fact, in his day one executive orders, he mentioned a push to revoke immigrant citizenships if it was, quote, unlawfully procured. But what does he mean by that? Last time, the goal was to investigate 700,000 naturalized citizens. And the unlawful procurements they were looking for included minor discrepancies, including typographical errors or innocent mistakes in the immigration process. Typos, we're talking. Citizens, legally naturalized U.S. citizens, can now be considered criminals and deportable if there was a typo or a simple mistake in their documentation. But hey, as long as your family's documents have no typos or suspicious smudges or even like a stray, misspelled word, they're totally fine, which makes this fine, right? Because as long as it's not happening to your family, it's okay. Not that it would matter historically in this country. Like during Japanese internment, about 2/3 were in fact US citizens, including tens of thousands second and third generation American-born Japanese Americans. Citizens, non-immigrants. Now I know you can make tons of excuses, different time, different thing, only criminals, whatever. But ultimately, here's the real question and why I keep bringing up Gitmo's history and jurisdiction in the first place. How the fuck will we even know who's held there? We were always told one thing about Gitmo, which is why so many people were okay with it. We were always told it held the worst of the worst. Always. It was just impossible to check. Impossible. So you want to tell me that your plan is to blindly trust this administration when they say there's nothing to see here, even despite everything they do openly say? You claim I don't look past the headlines. Do you ever look past the speech? Not that, by the way, even if they were telling the truth, that would somehow make a concentration camp okay. But then again, it sounds like what you're most upset about is that your family might think that it could apply to them. So tell them it doesn't. You tell them, no, we're the good kind of immigrants. No need to be afraid. It's happening to someone else. How's that poem go again? First they came for the bad hombres and I did not speak out because I was not a bad hombre. Something like that. I understand that you don't want your family to be scared. I do. But maybe instead of screaming at me, you could scream at the people doing this. And you can protect your peace however you want, but the rest of us would prefer to stay informed. And maybe stop encouraging other people to keep burying their heads in the sand.